You're listening to the Beyond My Battle podcast. I'm your host, Martel Catalano. Part intimate, part informative, and wholly designed to support you in your journey, each episode combines personal stories with expert insights to explore the many themes of life with illness or disability. The word mindfulness is seen a lot these days, everywhere from the classroom to the office, professional sports fields to prisons. Hundreds of peer-reviewed studies show that the millennial-old practice positively impacts one's health, particularly those with illnesses or caregiving responsibilities. Today, the intersection of mindfulness and medicine has gone from the fringes to mainstream, supported and implemented by doctors, universities, and hospitals. In this episode, you'll hear from 3 guests who have turned to mindfulness during their journeys with chronic or degenerative illnesses. Christy Carrera, Natalie Sayer, and author Tony Bernard share their stories of finding peace with their unexpected circumstances by redirecting their awareness to gratitude and the present. Later, you'll hear from Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction teacher Pierre Zimmerman, who sheds light on the difference between mindfulness and meditation, the importance for people with health challenges, and how to incorporate mindfulness into your daily life.
I'm Christy Carrera, and I own a crazy little business called Revive. I have 2 children, 11 and 13, and my son has muscular dystrophy.
My name is Natalie Sayer, and I'm a 20-something living with migraine and Lyme disease for the past 6 years.
My name is Tony Bernard, and 18 and a half years ago, I contracted a viral infection, and I've never recovered my health. I'm pretty much housebound, sometimes bedbound, and much to my surprise, I became, from my bed with my laptop, an author of several books on chronic illness that have developed a worldwide following.
So 4 years ago, my son was having unusual delays physically, and I took him to the doctor, and we found out he had muscular dystrophy. He was diagnosed with the most severe, which is called Duchenne, which is pretty much a life-altering disease. It ends your life early. It takes away pretty much any kind of freedom you may possibly have had.
Today, this is really called ME/CFS, the ME standing for Myalgic encephalomyelitis. I call it the flu without the fever. The acute symptoms have subsided. I don't have a sore throat. I don't have a fever, but I still feel as if I have the flu. You just have so little stamina. And you have symptoms of, your head feels full and your heart pounds, and just think about how you feel when you have the flu.
Chronic migraine requires you to have 15 or more headache days a month for a period of 3 months or longer. It's like head pain every single day with migraine attacks a couple times a week. And it's a really difficult condition to manage because it touches every single part of your life, from interaction to exercise to work to school to relationships. And it's also really difficult to treat.
What happened to me was so traumatic. I had to leave my career. I was a teacher at the university here in Davis, UC Davis. I sometimes say I traded the classroom for the bedroom.
I had to let go of every idea that I had for my child, of what it would be like to grow up, what it would be like for him to have children, to go to college, to get married, to have any independent life, because they essentially told us he'd be in a wheelchair by the time he was 11 and he would be lucky to make it to 20.
I think the biggest hurdle people face when trying to tell others that they experience chronic migraine is just the assumption that everyone gets migraines, and for someone who's experiencing chronic, it's really its own experience and its own problem.
We spent a year, visiting doctors and researching and going round and around. And then Oliver's father died unexpectedly, and it almost took the attention away from the disease because there was something even bigger. I guess it immediately put it into perspective for us. Like, holy cow, even a healthy person may only live to 39.
What happened was after a few years, I realized, okay, this is how my life is now. What am I going to do about it? All of my trying to will myself to get better wasn't working. I would go to sleep at night and say, you are going to wake up well, and ordering yourself around like that doesn't work.
I started using the Calm app, and I just did the daily Calm meditation for several months in a row, pretty much feeling like it was doing nothing almost every day, but I was determined to get some benefit out of meditation that I had heard so much about and been told by so many doctors and researchers and friends and family could be a really powerful treatment and tool.
Then I also turned to, holy shit, we got things to do. If this is actually going to happen, we better get ourselves moving. So it became a big inspiration, and we decided, well, if this is going to happen, then we're going to do everything we can right now. What are we waiting for?
I'd actually been a practicing Buddhist for 10 years before I got sick. I would go on 1 or 2 10-day to 2-week retreats a year that were focused on meditation, both sitting meditation, walking meditation, and approaching everything you did on retreat with mindfulness.
It was so transformative for me that I just wanted to share about my experience. And I started an Instagram a few years ago called Mindful Migraine, which grew into a blog and has grown into a really big community of support and encouragement, where I'm able to use the challenges I'm going through as fuel for connecting with and helping others.
It was so traumatic to have my life just turned upside down, unexpectedly, no warning. I'd like to say that at that point, the Buddhist teachings saw me through, but they didn't at first. They were kind of waiting in the wings for me to rediscover. But the first 3 or 4 years, I would say, of being sick, I was in a pretty depressed and dark place.
Well, the one thing that really happened, especially with Oliver's diagnosis, is there was no longer a place to go to escape it. So it really brought me to meditation and finding some kind of peace in the situation, because there was no way to escape at first. I was uncomfortable all the time, and that's really what led me to sit and start taking that inner journey more and being more appreciative and more aware of this idea of non-attachment or this idea of impermanence, because I couldn't get away from it.
When I started meditating and when I started mindfulness, I had the expectation that every time I dropped into quote-unquote meditation, I would feel calm and zen and like all of the pictures of people meditating. And I do get there sometimes, but I also know now that, like, specifically for coping with extreme pain or really high anxiety, sometimes it's just not engaging with the spiraling emotions or the spiraling sensations. It might not slow it down that much, but you're at least not fueling the fire of what's going on.
We started taking advantage of every moment and making every moment count. And we had these ideas of like bucket lists. Okay, well, if you only have a couple more years to walk, like what do we have to do? We have to at least see these things. Or I guess my idea also is that he would have more experiences in his short time than most people get in a full 80 years. And then that really put us on the road. We spent probably 6 months in Europe in the last year and a half. It kind of healed us in many ways, and it put his disease kind of in the background, because you see that everybody in the entire world has issues of all types. You know, people get sick and people die, and there is a sense of impermanence, and it's okay.
Being able to say, okay, if I had my choice, I wouldn't be sick, I wouldn't be housebound. I mean, I'd like to wake up tomorrow with my health restored. And if it is, I'll celebrate and be happy. But I have to make a good life for myself with what I've got.
taking the observer seat in mindfulness really means noticing that there's a part of my brain and my mind that can notice what I'm thinking and feeling as opposed to being consumed by whatever I'm feeling. When you are able to move into an observer seat, you can look at anxiety and recognize this is happening in my body, this is happening in my thoughts, but there's a part of you that's watching it happen instead of being completely consumed in the experience of it happening.
I call it the Buddha's list, where he goes over what everyone can expect to encounter sometime in life. And it's a pretty daunting list. And illness is on the list, pain is on the list, growing older is on the list, as is not getting what you want. And the flip side, of course, getting what you don't want, which is for me these tremendous limitations in my life.
I remember when I first found out, I was going to Mountain Jam Music Festival a couple weeks later, and I was still in the phase of crying all the time. And one time I was sitting there and I was looking around watching all these people dancing and being stupid drunks, and I was so pissed off. I got so mad because I'm like, why do these guys deserve to do this? Like and of course that's not right either, but I'm human. I'm looking at these people. I'm like, what determines who gets to do that and who can't walk?
The Buddha called it the second arrow, where you're hit by an arrow. And instead of with mindfulness, just pulling it out of your body and saying, whoa, that hurt. I didn't get what I wanted. We start doing things like, why did that arrow hit me? That's not fair. And we go on all these stories instead of just pulling the arrow out. The second arrow is this layer of emotional pain that we add on to life that's already difficult.
One of the phrases that's helped me the most in terms of dealing with interacting with other people and explaining what's going on is really internalizing the phrase, you are not unreliable, your health is, because there are so many days where I wake up and it's just like, okay, I can't do anything today. It's not in my control.
What do we do about this dissatisfaction? What we do is, this is for me the mindfulness component. If you become aware that you're suffering, feeling bad, angry, my husband loves to call it complaints. Even if it's a valid complaint, it's still a complaint. When you become aware that you're doing that, that mindfulness moment is a moment when, the way I like to put it is, you can stop making things worse. You're already not getting what you want or getting what you don't want. Stop making it worse. And the way you do that is by becoming aware that you're resenting life, envying other people, all those painful emotions that take our difficulties and add a layer of suffering to it.
Most of my self-care comes through work. It's almost like the more I experience and the more I look around, the more I want to give back as my self-care. Even with everything that's happened to us, I constantly hear myself say over and over, we're so lucky. We are, we're so lucky, we're so lucky. And people will look at me funny sometimes and I'll be like, oh, well, besides that, we're so lucky. You know what I mean? You have to let go of that story. And like you said, be present every single day. It doesn't matter. We're still so lucky. I have hot coffee and we have a room and there's heat and there's hot water here. And we're just so lucky. And just being present in this moment is, it's the only moment that you get.
If the worst case scenario is this is my life for right now, then I have to find a way to make peace with this pain and to make peace with my life and, find acceptance and calm, because looking for relief externally and not finding it over and over and over again in so many different places was incredibly difficult and disheartening. So mindfulness became a place where, no matter how many things were not working in my treatments or in my life, I could always close my eyes and put my hand on my belly and breathe for 10 minutes, without fail, that was always available to me.
I felt like a burden was lifted the day I realized that life is not necessarily fair. Life is uncertain and life is unpredictable. And we control a lot less than we think we do. We don't control so much. And so the question becomes not what happens, but how do we react to what happens?
I guess it's not even just a meditation. It's almost making more of your life a meditation. So just trying to be present in every way, shape, or form. And sometimes it's easier to do it in the mundane things because you're bored and while you're washing dishes or while you're putting laundry in, or even now while I'm looking for a heating system, I'm just like, well, there's so many things that could be worse, And after you've had a diagnosis, even for yourself or your family members, like, what is really worse? Doesn't that, you know what I mean? Like, oh, your car broke down. Like, yeah, it sucks, but
I think if you're a person who even tends towards anxiety or has had anxious tendencies in the past, it's almost non-negotiable that, like, if you become faced with a chronic condition, you have to find a way to wrangle that fear or it will eat you alive, naturally so.
If you get to a point where you can actually still your mind, it takes the burden off. Like, you aren't actually not that story of, oh my God, I got to schedule this appointment. And what if we're not stretching today? Or what if we didn't do this? Or I need to order these supplements. Like, when you're actually in the moment, you're not thinking about any of those things. And I think meditation can come in so many forms. And my daughter does it, whether she knows it or not. When she's creating art and when she's at that piano for hours, she's meditating in her own way because she's dropped all the thoughts, all the stories that we accumulate, and it gives you the breather that you need.
I found it liberating to not have life sugar-coated for me and to say, yes, I'm not always going to get what I want. And sometimes people are going to leave my life who I wish were still in it, whether it's friends that disappear because they're uncomfortable around illness. Everyone with chronic illness, they've all had that experience.
So I think mindfulness is a huge segue to gratitude. Just by being more aware, you start to notice certain things. My gratitude practice has been all about noticing the little things and really trying to focus on one of my favorite mantras is love your life more than you hate your pain. And finding ways to notice every single day reasons that I do love my life and love, this gift of being alive more than I hate my pain. And it's not to say that there aren't days where pain is absolutely consuming and tortuous and so hard to get through. But even on those days, now, after a couple years of a pretty devoted gratitude practice, I can list at least 10 things and say, well, I'm really grateful my mom texted me to check on me. I'm really grateful for this weighted blanket that helps me feel safe and secure. I'm really grateful for a warm cup of tea in my hands. I'm really grateful for a podcast that is helping me to feel distracted. And I think that once you start to integrate gratitude into your life, it almost feels like a superpower against the challenging things that you're experiencing, because if you can find things to appreciate and be grateful for, no matter how difficult things get, then you will be a more joyful, content person.
My kids, I think, are a little bit different because they're very aware of what to be grateful for. I think losing their father makes them realize every ounce of every day that, I don't know, at such a young age, it has been put in perspective for them. So they are very grateful.
The value of mindfulness is that it keeps you in the moment, allowing your life to unfold as it's going to unfold without getting lost. I like to call it getting lost in la la land, where you're lost in your stories.
The great thing about mindfulness is it's free, it's always accessible. You can't take too much of it. It's something that's always there for you when you need to cope with pain. And even if it's just 3 deep conscious breaths, that is going to help you more than not doing it will help you when you're in pain.
When these things happen, your instinct is to close your heart. And it's just, you can't, and you put up these walls of separation, or you wouldn't understand because I have this, or I go through this and you wouldn't understand. Like, that closure is so hard to penetrate. And I think instinctively it's just a defense mechanism that I think it's probably in our DNA to protect ourselves. And I think you have to work, with that inner work and with that looking inward, you have to work to open your heart again. You know what I mean? To actually be ready to talk to people and to be open with people and to share your story and to make connections again. And that is one of the most healing things ever.
It may seem paradoxical that by coming back to the now, a place that is often sad, fearful, or literally painful, our guests have been able to find a greater sense of ease. That by being present with the uncertainty and discomfort, we reduce its impact on us. You'll now hear from Pierre Zimmerman, who I talked with about the science, the application, and the transformative power of mindfulness.
Hello, my name is Pierre Zimmerman. I'm a teacher of mindfulness-based stress reduction for people with chronic illness, catastrophic illnesses, for the general population, and also for special populations. I'm an interfaith chaplain, trained and ordained in a Buddhist stream.
It's great to have you, Pierre. We are really excited to talk with you about mindfulness, as specifically as it pertains to people living with or caring for people living with chronic illnesses, rare diseases, and disabilities. There's so many definitions and ways of expressing mindfulness out there, but what is the way that you define mindfulness?
I will use the typical definition, but also add to it. So it's really embodied awareness, paying attention with curiosity, letting go of judgment. So that's kind of a common definition that was started by John Kabat-Zinn. What I want to add is that it's a way of being awake, being conscious, and really be present in our interactions in daily life, as well as when we sit with ourselves in meditation or kind of contemplative practice.
A lot of our guests talk about meditation in their mindfulness practice, and I think there's some confusion about whether or not meditation is mindfulness. How are they different? How are they the same?
The way I like to approach it is that meditation is a practice for us to come home to ourselves and gain some insight into our nature as to who we are, how we relate to the rest of the world. Mindfulness training or sessions are a little bit more elaborate in a sense that there's focus on embodiment. So we do body scans, which is a way to relax the body. We have meditation as a practice in the midst of it. However, we look at a lot of neurophysiology, look at the brain and how it interacts with the mind. We also look at how to use mindfulness post-meditation, so to speak. So how do we use it in communication? How do we use it in our inner circles, friends, family, or the workplace? And we really train at loving kindness, cultivating loving kindness, as well as non-referential compassion. So those elements don't necessarily part of meditation practices. For some people they are. And we know through research now that really meditation on loving kindness and compassion seem to speed up the capacity for us to be more present with ourselves and other people, particularly people who need our support with illness, disabilities, and so on.
How is mindfulness potentially extremely beneficial to people living with catastrophic, chronic, rare illness or disabilities that have totally altered their lives?
We know from research that it impacts the physiology of the brain, which means we can change our brain patterns on a regular basis. On an emotional level, it really helps us to regulate emotions, particularly distressful emotions. People who have illness tend to really go inside and blame themselves sometimes. So mindfulness can help at letting go of that. It also helps in letting go of associating feelings or emotions and owning them. And the practice really helps us to kind of move away from owning that. So for instance, when people say I'm anxious, there is no such thing. There is an awareness of moments of anxiety, but we don't have to own it, which is a big step in understanding how we can dissociate from that and not necessarily associate ourselves with disabilities, with dysfunctions, emotional dysfunctions, or any sort of that thing.
Is it safe to say that people who are living with the constant biological stressors, just say of a chronic illness or a disability that potentially limits them in sensory ways or causes them pain, is it safe to say that they probably have more fear and more activity in those parts of the brain?
Absolutely. I can relate my own experience. I was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer over 18 years ago now and was given 4 months to live. I couldn't function for 2 weeks, didn't want to know what it's all about, didn't know what kind of solution there was. People would tell me, go online, and I said, no, I cannot deal with that, just leave me alone. So my fear was so immense in many ways that I couldn't function. And it took a while, and I certainly credit having practiced a lot of mindfulness over the years to be able to calm down after a certain period and realize that I have a dis-ease in body and mind and have cancer cells in my body that are rogue cells. So how do I deal with getting better, coming back to wellness? For me, looking at cancer was I need a different attitude. I need an attitude of figuring out how can I live with it and not go to the full catastrophe, meaning that it was a path towards death necessarily, but to look at it as can I redirect these cells, not fight them. I don't like the term survivor, but really look at how to redirecting their energy and come through it, which obviously happened.
There's so many people who are in literal pain right now. And with mindfulness, we're often encouraging people to be present, to be in the now. How do we do that if there's physical dis-ease, discomfort, even debilitating pain in the now?
I make a distinction between suffering and having pain. When we have physical pain, sometimes we need to take medication. There are always side effects, but it's necessary at times. Suffering is usually optional. In other words, somebody has chronic pain, the difficulty arises when people get caught up in the anticipation of pain coming, and that creates more suffering, which creates more pain. With mindfulness, being in the present moment and just staying with it, not running away from it, over time really lessens the pain. And so it's the approach of looking at how do we use our mind to have some control over physical forces, physical elements that's translated as pain.
For someone who's never practiced mindfulness or who feel that they have a really hard time being present and getting away from that worry, where would you tell that person to start?
There lots of literature about mindfulness. So reading can be one, listening to YouTubes. Unfortunately, you can read as much as you want. It does take some practice and using the meditation skills to gain some more awareness about what mindfulness is all about. I would recommend people go to meditations where there are other people meditating. There's a difference meditating by yourself versus going to meditate with a group. There's also a way to start slowly. And my recommendation is always if you can sit with yourself for 10 minutes every day, that's a great step towards kind of getting to know your inner landscape.
When I try to work with people one-on-one or in a group about sitting with themselves, it's always the same. And you know what it is. It's, I can't shut up in there. It's so loud in there. And I think what we need to teach people and what I try to remind people is that's okay. And it's just the observing of what's going on in there. So I wonder if you can talk about that.
It is taking the time. I mean, we call ourselves human beings. We should really call ourselves human doings. So can we create this balance about work life, home life, life of sickness, etc.? So taking a look at how can we replenish ourselves, and it really is taking the time to be with ourselves. What are our liabilities? What are our strengths? What do we need to work on? What are our intentions to make some changes for the benefit of well-being and well-flourishing? That is possible regardless of the outcome of the disease and the length of how long we live. It's, again, going back to being in the moment, really being present to ourselves, and letting go of judgment, because judgment is a dead-end street. We can beat ourselves up and shame ourselves, etc., and it doesn't help in the whole process of moving towards well-being. People become discouraged because in the beginning there's a slew of thoughts arising and it feels very chaotic, and every thought has an emotional component to it, so it can be a little bit scary, can be a little bit daunting. And so it's a discipline. And what discipline means is that we need to continue and do our best. And there are certainly suggestions and directions from people. But it really takes some time to change our neuronal pathways in our brain. And that's what people need to know. It's like any discipline, things don't change immediately.
If someone wants to work on being more mindful and practice this mindfulness-based stress reduction in their life, aside from reading all the literature out there and research or watching videos, what is one thing they can do in their daily life to become more present?
What I would recommend, and it's my bias, when people wake up, have coffee, tea, whatever, take a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes every morning, and just kind of sit with themselves and pay attention to what rises, and maybe have some motivation or commitment to look at the upcoming day as something that is going to be great. So looking at the best possibilities is helpful. Doesn't mean we deny any feelings or any thoughts that come up that are not pleasant, but it's a way of kind of preparing for the day. We prepare for work, right? We prepare for all kinds of things. We prepare our kids to go to school, whatever. So it's take the time to be with ourselves and really discern what is going to be important for me to do today. So that might take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and that's plenty. One thing I want to add is, how important it is to be with a community of people who need support. Because really, there's so many commonalities that we might not be able to express with people who have no idea what goes on. And so there's sort of a bonding right away because of commonalities, even with suffering, but they're not dreadful. We actually, in support groups, see people laughing a lot and what I call, having a lot of vividness, being really alive regardless of what goes on, because we can share things that are common. And we also can have new resources that come up from people in terms of what they do and how they deal with whatever this is in their body, heart, or mind.
Some of Pierre's guided mindfulness meditations can be found in the Emotional E Toolkit within the meditation tool, available at beyondmybattle.org. Pierre also mentions the importance of community. You can find our mindfulness-based online community on Facebook by searching Beyond My Battle Support Group. This show is presented by Beyond My Battle, a nonprofit helping people manage the stress of illness and disability. All of the organization's resources, like this podcast, are rooted in mindfulness, awareness, and compassion to help individuals and care partners live happier, healthier, and more resilient lives. To support the podcast or any of our other programs, visit beyondmybattle.org/donate. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your family and friends.